Let's talk about Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, the latest adaptation of Carlo Collodi's wooden puppet who longs for becoming a real boy. This version has just dropped to Netflix and is quite clearly a project that del Toro has put a lot of his own heart and soul into, taking the story in a fresh direction via stop-frame animation. I'm going to talk about Pinocchio in some depth, so spoilers will be explored throughout the remainder of this honest review, as per usual on our channel. I've always considered del Toro to be a filmmaker whose strengths lie more in his visuals than in his storytelling. Thankfully, by adapting an already beloved tale certainly assists him in that department, though in common del Toro fashion he incorporates dark fantasy elements and a wartime backdrop to accompany it, akin to Pan's Labyrinth. I do believe that this is absolutely his strongest work since Labyrinth, perhaps Nightmare Alley giving it a close run. We kick off proceedings with the heartbreaking backstory of Geppetto, a carpenter in a rural Italian village, voiced amazingly by David Bradley, who idolizes his son, Carlo, no doubt named after the original story's writer. However, during the Great War, military planes flying overhead lighten their loads by dropping their bombs, not even intending to target the town, yet Carlo is caught in the crossfire. This right away was a brutally raw introduction to this telling. It gives you just enough time to embrace the loving bond between father and son before the mindlessness of war rips that all away from Geppetto's grasp. It's one of the most emotionally rattling openings to an animated kids movie since Up, but it also draws up the blueprints of del Toro's rather unforgiving world. Geppetto grieves the loss of Carlo by becoming a heartbroken drunkard, unable to move on with his life for decades. One evening, in a fit of alcohol-fueled rage, he decides to use his skilled hands to construct a wooden version of Carlo, not strictly a replacement, more of a physical embodiment to keep him company. The construction of the puppet here is certainly one of the darkest versions of this scene, if not the darkest. Pinocchio isn't made out of pure love, like say the 1940 Disney version. Here it's the result of pain, anguish and loss. Yes, it's still a process brought on by Geppetto's love for Carlo, but the music and imagery of the segment is kind of Frankenstein-esque, as though it's more frightening than anything else. I do also love how the wood Pinocchio is made from is from the pine tree. It just adds another layer to Pinocchio being a representation of Carlo in the eyes of Geppetto. Also, side note, just to discuss it now, the music in this film by Alexander Desplat is simply gorgeous, with the main theme being chillingly beautiful. And the songs used throughout the film, just the right amount where they didn't become cumbersome and overtake the core narrative, were all very catchy, especially Sebastian Crickett's little ditty during the credits. He was voiced wonderfully by Ewan McGregor, and I found that running gag of him always getting squashed or stood on right in the moments where he was about to do something meaningful was a hilarious inclusion, especially when he's about to break out into one of his own songs but is crushed by Pinocchio opening the door. It's great stuff. Once Pinocchio is born with the help of a wood sprite voiced by Tilda Swinton, a lot of the story follows common threads of the more popular versions. Pinocchio is kidnapped on the way to school by the circus, and he and Geppetto encounter the sea monster, a giant sperm whale named Monstro in the 1940 version, though here is known as the dogfish. To elaborate on these elements more, I really enjoyed the circus aspect, due to the circus master being voiced by the great Christoph Waltz. He's just one of many stars involved with this project, more including Cate Blanchett, Finn Wolfhard, John Turturro, Ron Perlman, Tim Blake Nelson, Bern Gorman. It's an undeniable plethora of talent, and it's no wonder why they didn't want to turn down the chance of being in this film. Anyway, carrying on the circus theme, the visuals here were fantastic, and you could really sense the exploitation of Pinocchio's abilities for the circus's gain, more so than any other version. Of course, as by this point the setting jumps to during the Second World War, we get the jarring scene of Mussolini rocking up to a show, only to be insulted by Pinocchio. In all honesty, I'm not 100% sure on how I felt about this scene. I fully appreciate del Toro wanting to set the film during this period and incorporating anti-war messages, because it's just something he's done a lot anyway, and it's pretty much to be expected of him now. But I really enjoyed how we got to see a couple important war-related figures here and there, with Mussolini seen in propaganda posters. I think that Mussolini's presence was still felt and resonated strongly here, without ever needing to see him. So when you do see him as a little parody character, with Pinocchio singing a silly song about poo. Yeah, I'm sure people will find that hilarious, at least some, but I think it just zapped away that kind of intentional fear factor it wanted to plug into this world's perspective on the wave of Italian fascism. A little clunky for my own personal tastes, though I can imagine plenty of people finding it tongue-in-cheek bonkers funny. Generally, the film does have some injections of humour scattered throughout, but the counterbalance to that is the serious overarching messages relating to the human experience, specifically in relation to death. It's by far the most mature version of Pinocchio I've seen. Well, other than Pinocchio's Revenge, of course, and I for one welcome that tone with open arms, because you can adapt Pinocchio into being so much more than just a fairy tale. It's proven here to work as a metaphor for love and loss, in such a poignant and touching way. In order to elaborate on that further, I need to discuss my personal favourite element to this film. You see, Pinocchio is brought to life here by the wood sprite, but Tilda Swinton also voices the sprite's sister, Death. Pinocchio is hit by a car and dies, waking up in the death realm, which visually was incredible and my favourite section of the film. Skeletal rabbits carry the coffin of Pinocchio before he breaks out of it and speaks to Death, a blue sphinx-like being. The rules of Death here are that she can send Pinocchio back to the living world indefinitely, though each time he dies, he has to wait a little bit longer before he can return. That concept alone is staggeringly creative and put me in mind of other creative death worlds like Grim Fandango. With Pinocchio being taken by the circus, Geppetto heads out to sea to try and find him, and that's where the dogfish comes in and swallows their ship. When Pinocchio helps, the ocean is full of sea mines, one of which is used to blow up the dogfish. Pinocchio dies in this event, but Geppetto is left sinking to the ocean's depths. Pinocchio is given an ultimatum by Death. He can return to the living world immediately in order to save Geppetto, but in doing so will become mortal, never being able to revive after death again. I loved this crossroads faced by Pinocchio here, and plays into the very important rule of whenever magic is used in a film or series or book, there needs to be some kind of consequence. Having to wait longer each time after death is one consequence, but in this instance, Pinocchio needs to return with immediate effect, and that provides another consequence. This was super effective and added weight and gravitas to the actions of the characters in this world. So Pinocchio returns and is able to save Geppetto, but again dies in the process. Cricket uses up the wish he was granted by the wood sprite for carrying out his duties in looking after Pinocchio. I loved the open honesty of Cricket here. He's asked if he did indeed carry out those duties as agreed, to which he says to be honest he was unable to all of the time, but he tried his best, and that's the best anyone can ask for, a phrase repeated throughout the film as a moral teaching. His wish is for Pinocchio to return to life, which is granted, and they all live a little longer together, with Geppetto realising that Pinocchio shouldn't be like Carlo. Carlo was Carlo, Pinocchio is Pinocchio, and he should live on as himself, fully coming to acceptance of the time he had with Carlo was special and precious, but that time's gone, and now he's got more time with a new person. The ending here is so bittersweet. Geppetto is notably an old man without much time left to live in the scheme of things, so Pinocchio and Cricket sacrificed everything just to provide this grief-worn man with love and companionship in his last slot of time. That's succinctly lovely. Geppetto fades away in his bed, and eventually Cricket is found dead on the windowsill, but Pinocchio carries on with them close to his heart, in the case of Cricket, literally in a matchbox, not letting the inevitability of death bring him down, instead embracing it and being thankful for the time that they had rather than the time that they lost. The final line here by Cricket, "What happens happens and then we are gone," is supremely profound, and I genuinely can imagine that being a tattooable quote for people. It's not dressed up in any fancy wording, it's direct and factual without coming across as cold or blunt, and at the very least was an important life lesson I was able to extract from the film. The level of depth in Del Toro's Pinocchio more than surpassed my expectations here. The stop frame animation, colour palette, lighting, character and world design were all phenomenal, and even though Del Toro's name is plastered onto to the title for marketability, I absolutely have to credit co-director Mark Gustafsson for his contributions to the film, as well as Adventure Time and Over the Garden Wall writer Patrick McHale for co-writing the screenplay. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if this one picked up a couple Oscars next year. It's all the best things about Del Toro with virtually none of the worst things. An adaptation of one of the most famous fairy tales ever written, which I'm certain will be a beloved classic for years to come. But that's just my own personal thoughts on the film. My word isn't gospel, and I'm certainly not a critic, just a regular guy who watches stuff. So if you'd like to agree or disagree with anything I've said, along with providing your thoughts, then our comments section is always an open forum for us to have a chat about it. And while you're down there, if you did appreciate this video, do me a big favour and hit subscribe for us, as it'd be a huge benefit to the channel and means that more people can discover us and get involved with the conversation too. The power's in your hands, Ghoul Gang. I've been Connor from Unleash the Ghouls, and we shall see you next time for another honest review. Cheers out.